Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. Welcome to part 5 of our 6-part Rivals of Ixalan full set review, where today we are looking at all of the green cards. And if you've been watching this series, you kind of know what to expect. We're going to look at each card individually. First and foremost, discuss it through the lens of limited, draft, and sealed. But also, sometimes these cards, of course, could cross over into other formats like Standard, Modern, Commander, what have you. We'll address that as well. But first and foremost, we'll be looking at the limited game. Now, with that being said, quickly before we get started, just a really fast reminder. If you're looking for a way to help support the channel and what we do here, just check out the description below. You'll find Patreon link to there. You'll also find some products on Amazon. If you make any purchases on Amazon, once you go through that first link, we'll get a small percentage no matter what it is. And then finally, of course, Flipside Gaming still has a promo code. You can save some money. And if you use it, we also get a small percentage. So it's always appreciated. With that being said, let's get into it. We're going to start off with Aggressive Urge. This is actually a reprint from Invasion and then later again in 10th edition. So it's a little combat trick that replaces itself. I don't have a lot to say about this card. It's very playable. Might not always make your cut. I love the fact that it's 2 casting cost and it does let you draw a card at cantrips, which is fantastic. But the effect isn't huge. I mean, +1/+1, it's going to be good enough a lot of the time, though. But some of the time, it might not be strong enough. So here's the way I look at this card. If I have enough regular removal, maybe I skip it. If I have removal and maybe some better combat tricks, maybe I skip it. But if I'm in the market for something to complement my removal suite in the form of a combat trick, and this is what I got, it's still playable. So there's nothing wrong with the card at all. Cacophodon. Wow, Wizards, your made-up dinosaur names are killing me this week. So this is a fine, kind of like curve-filling dinosaur if you need something at the 4 spot. It's actually a very serviceable 4-drop just generally for draft or seal because 2/5 power toughness, even though it's more defensive than offensive, it's still pretty good stats for 4 mana. And then it's also a dinosaur and also has this Enrage ability as well. And the Enrage ability is interesting. I mean, if you attack in with it and say they just block with a smaller creature and it survives, then it does get to perhaps untap or you untap something else. Could untap a land because it is target permanent. So maybe you untap the land, allows you to play something else. There's a lot of weird interactions that could happen with this card. I wouldn't rely on those happening. If I were to play this, I would play it just because it's a 2/5 for 4 and I need something in my 4 spot. And then if the Enrage happens to do something cool, then wonderful. Cherished Hatchling. Okay, this one's kind of weird. It's a 2/1 for 2. It's an okay 2-drop if you need one, right? If you don't have better ones in your pool, then you can run this because I say this all the time, but the 2-drop spot is probably one of the more important portions of your deck when you're playing Draft and Seal. You want to make sure you have a board presence early on in those formats. If this is what you got, this is what you got. The reason I'm not like super high on the card is just because first off, it is a 2/1 as opposed to a 2/2 for 2. But secondly, the ability is kind of hit or miss for me. It's just too situational. Like everything has to line up just right for you to get the true value of the card. And when it happens, it's going to feel great. But it's not going to happen all that often, I don't think. Because first off, this thing has to be on the battlefield. It has to die, not exile, but actually die. Once it dies, then you have to have mana available to play a dinosaur. And you have to have a dinosaur in your hand. Then you play it, and to really unlock the true value, you have to have a fight target, right? So all that is not always going to happen. When it does, well, you got there. But let's face it, like I'm only playing this if I just desperately need another 2-drop. Also, it might be worth mentioning that in rare circumstances, it is important to know that this works for all dinosaur spells until end of turn. Probably won't matter that often, but just something to keep in mind. Colossal Dread Maw. Here we go again with cards from Ixalan. I've been kind of getting on Wizards' back all week for this one, and it doesn't really bother me, but I think it's kind of funny that they just took cards from Ixalan and just put a new flavor text piece on there and just a new expansion symbol. And we're like, here you go, done and done. So same art, same creature. With that being said, like it's a fine limited creature. You probably played with this in Ixalan, so you probably know. It's a good dinosaur if you need something at the 6th spot that is at least formidable. Like sometimes you're going to have better, larger drops and then you don't play this perhaps. But I played this many times and it's been great for me. Like a 6/6 trample for 6 can be strong, especially in sealed. So yeah, you know what? It's a fine card. You might not always play it, but when you do, it's going to do work for you. Crested Herdcollar. Okay, this is actually a really good limited card because for 5 mana, you're getting 6/6 power toughness on the battlefield. That feels pretty good to me. Now, both cards have trample, and yeah, I get it. It would have been nice to maybe instead have like those combined in a way, maybe as a 6/5 or something like that because of the trample ability. But at the same time, you know what? I'm happy getting 3/3 power and toughness on the battlefield for just 5 mana. This actually feels like a pretty good card. 2 different dinosaurs you're getting as well, which could apply to some Dinosaur Matters mechanics. And overall, just a really strong creature. Not something I would necessarily expect to see in Standard, but I think very good for limited purposes. Also, it's 2 cards in 1, so that can help you to achieve Ascend a little bit quicker. Deeproot Elite. Okay, now this is a card that could see Standard play. This is actually a very good Merfolk. Let's talk about limited first. I mean, the card is a little fragile being a 1/1 for 2. That's a little awkward. But if it can stay alive and you can start putting other Merfolk on the battlefield, it starts tossing around +1/+1 counters. So it can be used to buff itself a little bit, or it could be used, and maybe more importantly, to add power toughness to some Merfolk that have evasion, some of the unblockable ones, or have little tricks that make them hard to block, stuff like that. That's really what Merfolk are all about, especially in your limited game. Now, for sealed, you might not have enough Merfolk, honestly, to run this unless you're really lucky. But for draft, if you can draft into the Merfolk deck, this will be a great inclusion in that deck, no doubt. Beyond that, when it comes to Standard, I think this could see Standard play in a Merfolk deck. Now, you're going to see as we go through the video today, the first Ixalan, they gave us some cool Merfolk, but nothing felt super competitive. This particular set is going to change that. They're putting in a lot of more competitive Merfolk. We're going to see an awesome Merfolk Lord tomorrow. Another card that is kind of a quasi-Lord, which we'll also see tomorrow. And we'll see some good ones today, too. So there's a lot of pieces coming to play here to actually make that Standard deck a reality, I think. And this will be a part of it. Modern, there's also a Modern Merfolk deck that kind of shifted a little bit. And the old version's still out there, but there's a newer version of that Merfolk deck in Modern that played some of the Ixalan cards and added green. I don't necessarily think this card gets into that deck because that deck is pretty tight. It's going to take really good cards to get into it. There will be some that we see tomorrow that I do think will get into it. But, and maybe even some today. But I think for the most part, this is a card you'll see in Standard, and it's definitely good in the right limited build. Enter the Unknown. This is actually a pretty good card, but I'm going to pick on it a little bit because it's not quite as amazing as it feels at first glance. First off, it only costs 1. Hey, you know what? I love sorceries that only cost 1. Target creature you control explores. I love when my creatures explore. You may play an additional land this turn. I love playing an additional land this turn. But you put it all together in this package, it gets a little clunky, because here's the problem with it. It's a 1 casting cost, but you need a creature to cast it, so it's not really a turn 1 play or anything like that, unfortunately. It actually means it's probably a turn 3 play most of the time, because sometimes you have 1-drops, but let's be honest, most of the time you're not playing or bothering with a lot of the 1-drops they put in these sets. So you're looking at a 2-drop, turn 3, you can maybe play another 2-drop in this, or as long as you have the lands and you're sure you have the lands, you could play this, put down the extra lands, and then also play a 3-drop. That would be actually kind of awesome. But again, you have to make sure you have the land in your hand. Now, the good news is you do get to explore in case you don't have the land. You have a chance of hitting it. So that's kind of cool too. But yes, it's a nice way to propel yourself, but don't think it's going to be like this turn 1 like way to propel immediately. It takes a little finessing, and if for some reason you can't get a creature to stay on the battlefield, this thing becomes a dead card for a while, and that's kind of awkward too. So it's still good. I'm still going to play it because the extra momentum you can get from it and the extra Explorer is good enough for 1 mana. But remember, worst case scenario, this might simply sometimes just be an Explorer for you. And if it is, it's probably not worth taking a place in your deck, unfortunately. But I think you still play this because a lot of the time it will also be the land too. So it's a good card. I just don't want anyone to think it's like as crazy, like broken as some people I think thought when they initially saw it. It's definitely not a broken card, but it is a good limited card. Like some of the other cards, this is another way to sometimes get Ascend a little bit faster as well. I don't know if I actually play this within Standard because a lot of the Standard decks I think are going to want to be a little more consistent in this, especially if you don't have the land in your hands or you can't get the creature solidified on the battlefield. Just doesn't feel consistent enough for me, unfortunately. Forerunner of the Heralds. Okay, here's the Merfolk Tutor, and it's actually pretty sizable. 3/2 for 4, tutors up to Merfolk, goes on top of your library. And also, whenever a Merfolk enters the battlefield, it gets a +1/+1 counter, so it can grow over time, too. Kind of wish you could put that counter on any Merfolk, but hey, this is fine. At least it starts off as a sizable creature and can become quite big quite fast, actually. So the real draw here, of course, though, is tutoring up the Merfolk, maybe getting a Lord or something like that, or if you have a really key Merfolk in your deck, there are some good ones out there. So that makes this card actually pretty valuable, maybe more valuable in certain builds than others. So for limited purposes, if I'm into Merfolk, yeah, I'm going to play this. Even if I don't have like an amazing like Merfolk target to search up, even a Lord will do. Actually, that qualifies probably as an amazing target some of the time. But if you don't have a Lord even, just another Merfolk that is unblockable or something could be good for you. I feel like this is a fine limited card. If you're not in Merfolk, obviously, skip it. It's not that great for you. You don't want a 3-2 for 4. So if you're not all in on that plan, it's not a great card. Now, aside from that, though, I do think this might see some play in the standard Merfolk deck again to help tutor up some key cards when the time comes. It's a little too expensive, though, I think, for the modern version. Galta Primal Hunger. Okay, here's the Elder Dinosaur for green. And this card's actually super sweet. So look at it this way. Yes, the casting cost looks pretty heavy at first glance. But you get a 12/12 with Trample. It will cost X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. So what do you want to do with this? I want to play Regisaur Alpha to set this up, because that is an incredible setup. You're going to be getting 7/7 power toughness on the board with Regisaur Alpha. And you're also going to give this thing haste, basically. So this is going to bring the casting cost down to 5, which is very reasonable. Even with just those two cards, the Regisaur Alpha and the token it makes, comes down to 5 casting costs for a 12/12 Trample. That's pretty sweet. Yes, it requires a little setup. Also, too, you probably have at least one other dinosaur on the battlefield, too, because Regisaur costs 5. Hopefully, you still have something from your first few turns on there, so it could bring this down even lower. That's a monster play, right? So that interaction alone makes me feel like this card not only is going to be awesome in any of your limited games, like first pickable all day long in draft, because even if you don't get a Regisaur Alpha, like there's so many other dinosaurs or creatures that can build up to this, this becomes very playable actually very quickly, especially if your opponent doesn't have a lot of good removal to take care of your creatures early and often, right? So this card is going to definitely make an impact when it hits the battlefield. Now, as for standard, I do think the Gruul Dinosaur deck could have a second life just because of this and the Regisaur Alpha interaction. If your opponent doesn't have a way to deal with that, they're going to be just trampled on, and they might not be able to come back from that. So this is definitely going to see standard play, I have no doubt. This could even see some modern play potentially in the right deck, just because there's so many ways to just bring that casting cost down, and it's just such a formidable creature. So this is one to watch, definitely. And commander purposes, too, just a super fun commander for sure. Guildgrove Stalker. Pretty good 2-drop, actually. This one's a Merfolk, and it can get some early damage across due to the fact that it can't be blocked by creatures power 2 or less. That's actually kind of good, even though it has slightly less toughness than I would like to see from a 2-drop. I'm okay with it because of the ability. This will be good in Merfolk builds as well, because over time, maybe you can throw some +1/+1 counters on it, so it kind of moves with the curve of the game. That could be kind of interesting for a card like this. Makes it a pretty decent 2-drop with some legs and the right build. So yeah, if you're all in on Merfolk, this maybe becomes a better pick. Even if you're not, though, it's a fine 2-drop if you're looking for something like this that feels a little more aggressive. Hardy Veteran. Well, I'll say this card isn't broken, but it's a good card. This is actually a great 2-drop. A 2/2 for 2. I love that already, and it has upside. Yeah, sign me up. Weird that it's a human warrior, so it doesn't fit into one of the tribes, which is always strange in Ixalan, but still a great 2-drop. It's a little odd, too, that you get the toughness not on your opponent's turns, but on your turn, so it can't really defend you, which it would be too powerful then if it could for 2, but it does allow maybe for some value attacks by giving you the extra toughness. Yeah, I'm happy to play these whenever I can grab them in limited, honestly. The 2 spot is just critical for your deck. I say that all the time, so having something like this is awesome. Hunt the Weak. Love this removal spell. Of course, this is a reprint, but what I love about this spell is this is great green removal. Yes, it is conditional because green removal kind of is conditional, but it gives you the +1/+1 counter, so it leaves a lasting effect. It helps with the fight. Just a fantastic card overall. It works well with Merfolk, who kind of want +1/+1 counters as they kind of play around with the growth and the evasion thing. It's good for some dinosaurs too, even though it's not as critical there, but the Trampler getting another point of damage is never a bad thing. So fantastic card. This could be first pickable in a lot of packs. For standard, Hunt the Weak, sometimes a little too expensive to make it into the format. I think that's true for this meta too. But you know what? Who cares? Awesome for limited. Jade Bearer. This is a little awkward because, yes, technically you'll get 2/2 power toughness for 1, but you can't think of this as a 1-drop because you don't want to play this on turn 1. I mean, maybe you do, but you kind of want to play this like on turn 3. And that's awkward because now you're playing this in another 2-drop as opposed to playing a 3-drop. Granted, you're getting an extra +1/+1 power toughness than you would typically get out of 1-drop. Maybe that makes up for it sometimes, but yeah, this is a weird card, and if you can't find a target at some point and your opponent's removing your creatures early on, this thing becomes super awkward. So a lot of times I'm just going to simply skip this in lieu of just a regular 2-drop, like the one we saw a few moments ago would just be a much better choice. I realize this is good if you want to add a counter to a Merfolk with evasion, but it just seems very inconsistent to me. Jadecraft Artisan. Here's a Merfolk that has a enters battlefield ability that can actually target anything, not just other Merfolk. You don't see that all the time in the set, so that's actually kind of cool. Works well with dinosaurs or whatever. So it's a 3/3 for 4. That's on par, really, for what I would expect from a 4-drop, minimally in limited, and then I get upside on top of it. So this is a pretty good card. And if I can play this +2/+2 on maybe a trampled dinosaur or an evasion Merfolk, yeah, it could be a big turn for me. So I like this card. I could see myself playing it probably most of the time, especially if I'm in Merfolk. Jade-Light Ranger. This card is awesome. Okay, 2/1 for 3, double Explorer Merfolk. That's all you need to know, because look at it this way. For 2 green and 1, granted it is 2 on color, but still. 2 green on 1, you're either getting a 2/1 and you're drawing 2 cards. Granted, they're lands, but they're moving you through your deck. Or you're getting yourself a 3/2 and you're drawing a land and you're doing one of these Explorer quasi-scry things where you could potentially even dump a card into the graveyard, which actually could matter. Or you're getting yourself 2 of these quasi-scries and a 4/3 for 3. No matter how that shakes out, it's good for you. It's value. So this is an awesome card. I would first pick this probably in a lot of packs. It's great with Merfolk, but you don't have to be in Merfolk to get the benefit from this. It's still just a solid creature for 3 and a great, like, almost head of curve creature, honestly. And I do think this does see play in the standard Merfolk deck. It's just strong enough to be there. Maybe the modern deck. I don't know. The double green, and again, that deck is very, very tight. So I won't go and say yes for sure, but there's a chance. I'd at least want to test it out. Jungleborn Pioneer. This is a good limited card too. This thing gives you 3/3 power toughness on the battlefield for 3. That actually feels very, very good. And 1/1 is in the form of a hexproof Merfolk, so it helps you start to go wide a little bit too, which could be good for Merfolk deck. And there are some advantages through other cards of going wide sometimes. So yeah, great 3-drop. Good curve filler that just feels, again, a little above and beyond. And it's another card that interacts well with Ascend. Knight of the Stampede. This one's kind of interesting, I think, for limited purposes, more so for constructed. We've seen a lot of ways to take dinosaur spells down, casting cost-wise. This is another way, but this one does cost 4, so I don't think this crosses over into standard very well if there is a dinosaur deck, but I do think this is great for you in limited if you're playing dinosaurs, or you just need a curve filler 4, because a 2/4 for 4 is not amazing, but it's not bad either. Maybe even in sealed, you might kind of be stuck into playing this, even if you're not playing dinosaurs, but it's an okay creature. But the payout for dinosaurs is quite good, especially if you happen to have one of the Elder Legends or something like that, or just any big dinosaur. This can just help you kind of ramp that out faster. Very good card overall, and probably not like first pick for me, but if I'm going down the road where I'm in dinosaurs and I have 1 or 2 big ones, yeah, this will be a great pickup, maybe in pack 2 or pack 3. Naturalize. This is another reprint that was sorely missed for a long time. It's back again. Last time we saw this was Dragons of Tarkir. Now, this is a card that was a color-shifted version of Disenchant, which shifted over to green in Onslaught, if I remember correctly, back in the day. But long story short, this is awesome. I'm glad they brought it back. I said this in some of the other videos this week, but Wizards has not done a great job of giving us answers to problems. Simple, easy answers to some of the things that can kind of get out of hand in standard. They're doing a good job in this set to try to sprinkle those answers in. Naturalize is just another one of those. Now, between Shatter, and we got a Braid not too long ago, and some other artifact destruction, I feel like the sun is setting on the vehicles deck, unfortunately, for folks that play that deck. But yeah, there are a lot of decks now that have to think about Naturalize as being a potential sideboard card in Standard if they become too powerful. So this does have Standard implications, definitely. And beyond that, this is a sideboard card that's good for you in Limited too. Now, I don't main deck this typically because sometimes I don't have targets for it, but when I see an important target, I'll just board it in, and it can be really good for you. Very cheap instant speed removal for artifacts and enchantments. Oraska Frillback. This is a fine vanilla 3-drop. Like, I'll be honest, a lot of times I don't get thrilled about the 4/2 3-drops because they are very fragile and sometimes they trade down. But if I need a 3-drop and I'm trying to push things a little more aggro, yeah, it's a fine card. You'll play it some of the time. Overgrown Armasaur. Oh, Wizards. More of these dinosaur names. Okay. So this one's interesting, though, because you don't see a lot of this type of thing from the dinosaurs. Basically a 4/4 for 5 with the Enrage getting a 1/1 green Sapperling token. But I kind of like it because it allows you to get more aggro with your dinosaurs and not have to worry about your defenses as much. Because let's say I have some big dinos, but I'm afraid of the crackback from whatever my opponent has. Maybe they went wide or something like that. I could potentially still attack in with these dinosaurs now if I thought, well, there's ways to produce these green sapperling tokens as I go along the way. So maybe that's through some enrage enablers, or maybe just through regular combat at times. But making even 1 or 2 green sapperlings, I mean, this card definitely pays for itself pretty quickly and does create a board state where you can attack more freely. So I like what they did with this one. Maybe it doesn't always make your cut because it is 5 and there's going to be a lot of competition for that 5 spot. There's some great 5 drops in this set just generally. So I don't know, sometimes it doesn't make the cut, but I think if you have some enrage enablers, you're going to play this and be pretty happy with it a lot of the time in limited. Path of Discovery. This is okay in limited. My big complaint about the card is the fact that it costs 4 and doesn't do anything on its own when it enters the battlefield. You feel like you're taking a turn off, and the 4th turn or 5th turn of the game could be an important turn. So that's not thrilling to me. But if I were to back this up with some light ramp, maybe play it on turn 4 consistently, or even turn 3 at times, now I'm starting to think to myself, okay, you know what? From this point forward, it's all value. As long as I can get creatures on the battlefield, I'm getting value, because Explorer is really, really good. So I would try it. Again, it's better with some light ramp, and it's maybe not for all builds. Definitely know your deck. Like if you're super aggro, you don't want to take a turn off to mess with this. You want to just keep putting pressure on it. But if you're being a little more methodical and you have some good blockers and such, then yeah, this will be a good card for you. I think it's a little too situational, unfortunately, a little too expensive for the standard world, but I want to try this out in limited. It could be a fun card. Plummet. Okay, this is another reprint. Destroy target creature with flying. Very simple card. It's been a while since we saw it in standard. Actually, Battle for Zendikar, so a little while. And beyond that, it was in Conspiracy 2, though, so you might have played with it there recently. So with that being said, this is an awesome sideboard card. I have seen people main deck this. I played against people who main deck this, and I'm kind of like, oh, really? The main deck Plummet? Okay. But you know what? It's burned me, so they didn't make a bad decision, I guess. So, I don't know. I usually side this in, though, when I see some flyers, because especially in Ixalan, if you're against like decks that don't have a lot of flyers, maybe like Merfolk or perhaps Dinosaurs, like this could be a dead card some of the time. So, but usually there's some target for it, but I'm going to bring it in when I need it. And Azorius Colors, you're going to run into a lot of flyers, definitely, from both Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan. So this card becomes very critical in those kind of matchups, and it's just very cheap. It's kind of like the Green Doomblade, people used to say. It's kind of a joke. Sometimes it does feel like that, even though, of course, it is restricted to just flying. So, pretty good card, real cheap, instant speed. What about standard? Yeah, actually, I do think it's sideboard playable there in standard. A lot of people are talking about brewing like an Azorius Flyers deck, and that deck could finally get there now, maybe with Rivals. But with a card like this that could come out of boards, you have to be really cognizant of that, because that could really hurt a deck like that. So we'll have to kind of see how that pans out. But yeah, this is definitely sideboard playable in standard. Polyraptor. All right, here's the big mythic in green. 2 green and 6. It's kind of expensive. You get yourself a 5/5 that whenever it takes damage, it copies itself. Hey, that doesn't sound so bad, right? We talked about this card actually at length yesterday and its interaction with the Red Forerunner. So check out that video for maybe more details, but I'll give you kind of the quick rundown and try to expedite things along a little bit. But let's talk about this as a fair card first, what you can do with it. Takes a little time to get there, but 8 mana, you'll get there in a game unlimited, especially with a little ramp behind you in green or something like that. You'll definitely reach that point. Once you do, it's a 5/5, which feels small for that casting cost, but at the same time, it's really awkward because any sort of combat interaction is just going to replace itself. Your opponent really needs to destroy or exile it, basically. If there's anything that's going to do damage to it, it's not good enough because it's going to just make another copy. If you try to destroy it in combat, not good enough because it's just going to make another copy. It's just really, really hard to deal with. Without a removal spell, your opponent's in a tough spot, honestly. Now, granted, it doesn't mean you win the game at all, because they could have a removal spell, or perhaps they have a bunch of flyers and you just fell behind too far. It's not like a I win the game card for 8 mana or anything like that, but it's very, very good, and it's going to have to make your opponent really think about their future plays. Now, I mentioned yesterday the combo with the Red Forerunner, which allows you to tutor this up, and then when a dinosaur enters the battlefield, it will do 1 damage to all creatures, turning on the enrage and also pinging everything, which is pretty important too sometimes. And long story short, because I went into all the detail yesterday, I won't go into it today, but the Forerunner also takes the damage from that, which means it can ping 3 times. Yesterday I said that this interaction would give you 7 Polyraptors, but actually the more I thought about it, you could actually skip the 3rd ping when the 3rd dinosaur resolves, and save that for the 4th dinosaur, and you get 1 more dino out of it. So you could actually get 8 Polyraptors. And just that interaction alone could be quite tight, right? In a game of limited, your opponent probably doesn't have a lot of answers for something like that. And if you have Sheltering Light from Ixalan, it gets even better because you could actually make an unlimited amount of these things. That's kind of crazy. So, okay, other than crazy combos aside, though, it's still a good card. It's still very playable, probably first pickable. The big drawback here is the expense and the fact that you could pay 8 and it could get blown up by a Destroy spell. That won't feel great. And you're taking that risk, but when it does pay off and your opponent doesn't have that kind of answer, then, yeah, you're on your way to perhaps winning the game with this thing, quite honestly. Standard purposes, I think the C standard play, I think it's going to be in a dinosaur deck. I think a dinosaur deck will get there. I think this is a one-of, though, in that deck, because what I want to do with this card is use it as a secondary win condition. When I finally have enough mana, I just go ahead and use the Forerunner and go into that Forerunner combo. I'm not even concerned about Sheltering Light. The 8 dinos are good enough for me. Now, yes, a combo like that is going to be a little harder to pull off in Constructed Standard, obviously, with more removal and such. But that's why I think it's a one-of, and it's just something you fall back on if your other plan's not working out. Maybe your other plan is Regisaur Alpha and the green Elder Dragon Legend we saw earlier, right? So that deck could become pretty potent. Strength of the Pack. Okay, this is a fine card. Like, I could see myself skipping this a lot, though, in Limited. Here's the deal with it. It costs 6, which is competing with a lot of big things, and sometimes just having a big old dinosaur at 6 is a little more secure, makes me feel a little more secure than something like this, which is dependent on board state more. If I don't have a lot of creatures or any creatures in play, or I can't get up to 6 mana, this card kind of is a dud, right? So if I'm behind, it doesn't help me catch up, it doesn't solidify the board state for me necessarily. Now, there are decks where this is going to be better, but strangely enough, I don't think that's always the dinosaur deck, because I think dinosaurs, at some point, how big do they need to get, right? Like, if I have 6, 6, 7, 7 tramplers, like, what's the difference if they get a couple more points of damage across a little bit faster? Like, the damage is still coming pretty hard. So, I'm not saying it would be bad to have, but would I want that over a whole new dinosaur, perhaps? Probably not most of the time, honestly, because dinosaurs don't tend to go as wide as they tend to go tall. But in a Merfolk deck where you might be going slightly wider, or hey, even a vampire deck if you're in Selesnya colors for some reason, like this type of thing would be great there to buff a wide team. So that's where I'm thinking about playing it more honestly than, even though there's dinosaurs pictured on the card, than the dinosaur deck itself in Limited. Now, Standard, no, this is too expensive and too conditional, but in the right build in Draft or Sealed, I can see myself wanting to throw one of these in. Swift Warden. This is a fantastic card. It's a 3 casting cost 3/3 with flash, and it's a Merfolk. That alone sells me for Draft or Sealed. But even beyond that, when it enters the battlefield, you can protect one of your Merfolk with hexproof. So if someone's using a removal spell like on your Lord or something like that, you slam this down, you put the kibosh to that real quick, and you get yourself a fairly large Merfolk, a 3/3 for 3 on the battlefield. Fantastic. This card may be first pickable in some packs if you want to try to force Merfolk, but more or less this will be great and very welcome to see in pack 2 and pack 3 once you're already starting down that road. And I think this is good enough, easily good enough for the standard Merfolk deck, which I'm sure we will see. Now, modern Merfolk, maybe. I don't know. Again, the double green and the 3, it starts to feel maybe a tad slow there. But that ability is strong. I'd at least want to test it out, maybe. Tendershoot Dryad. Okay, another card that gives you Sapperling tokens. My biggest complaint about this is it's real fragile for a 5-drop. 2/2 for 5. And by that point in the game, there's probably a lot of ways that this card could be kind of blown up. The good news, though, is it can give you Ascend. And if you can keep this thing alive, it gets kind of bonkers. Notice that it's the beginning of each upkeep you get a Sapperling. So you do play this on your turn for 5, you get a 2/2. Past the turn your opponent goes, you get a 1/1. They pass the turn, you get another 1/1. So by the time it gets back to you, you did get 4/4 power toughness on the battlefield for 5. That feels a little bit better, assuming you can survive that time, right? Now, that also really builds towards your Ascends, and hopefully at that point you got Ascends. And if you do, now these things are 3/3 Sapperlings, and they just keep coming. Your opponent needs an answer or they lose, basically. If they don't have a way to stop that from happening, the game is going to just collapse around them. So it's a good card. You just want to think about maybe some light ramp backup or some ways to protect it. Maybe you're in some sort of Simic with some counter magic or something like that. You want to protect this card a little bit, but it is bonkers if it can go off. So maybe if you're more aggro or something like that, you might not play it because this is not a 5-drop that's going to put any significant pressure on your opponent quickly. But long term, this is a fantastic card for a slower, more methodical deck. And yeah, you know, I think first pickable in some packs. I'd want to give it a whirl anyway. It's pretty interesting. I do think it's too fragile, though, unfortunately, for standard. In Commander 2, remember it activates for each upkeep, so that is a lot of tokens if your opponents don't do something about this pretty quickly. Thrashing Brontodon. Okay, this is a 3 casting cost 3/4. Guess what? You had me at 3 casting cost 3/4. I'm going to play this card in Draft and Sealed, and I'm going to love the thing. Aside from that, I can pay 1, sack it to destroy target artifact or enchantment, so another hate card for artifacts and enchantment. Amazing. So they're not messing around there. And it's a dinosaur on top of everything else. So with that being said, yes, this is a high pick for me just because of its size. If nothing else, even if I'm not in a dinosaur deck, even if I don't care about artifacts and enchantments, 3 casting cost 3/4, I am on board with this. But what about standard? You know something? The dinosaur deck, if there is enough of an issue with artifacts and enchantments, maybe instead of playing naturalized, they just play this because it's still a body that puts pressure on the board too, and also goes towards bringing the Elder Dinosaur's casting cost down. So who knows? Maybe this actually crosses over into standard for those reasons. It's an interesting thought anyway, if nothing else. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. But definitely for Draft and Sealed, you're going to love this card. Thunderherd Migration. Fantastic card, actually. It is sorcery speed, but it is fantastic ramp and color fixing. Basically, if you can reveal a dinosaur, it's a rampant growth. And if you can't, just pay 1 more. And you know what? A 3 casting cost rampant growth is still awesome. So there's a lot of great utility for this to just kind of edge you along a little bit, fix your colors, and also help you get closer to Ascend faster. That's nice too. You don't want to forget about that. So yeah, this card is phenomenal in the set. It's going to be maybe a high pickup in a lot of packs in the draft. You're always going to be happy to run something like this if you're in green, quite honestly. And aside from that, I think it's strong enough to actually see play within the realm of standard. Maybe that is a dinosaur deck, but maybe even outside dinosaur decks. 3 starts to get a little expensive for the ability in standard, I think. But if there's a deck that really is getting greedy with colors or something like that, you never know, it could be a possibility. Wayward Swordtooth. This is a weird one because it's a 3 casting cost 5/5, but it doesn't turn on really as a blocker or an attacker until you get Ascend. However, you can play an additional land each turn when this is in play. It almost feels almost like a light Theros God. I don't know. It's kind of weird design, but I like it. I'm trying to think about where I'd actually want to play it, though. My first thought when it comes to Draft and Sealed is, you know what, you could risk playing this for 3. Again, maybe put a little light ramp behind it. If you can throw your lands down a little bit faster, this works really great with Explore. So all these kind of like throwing down extra land cards, the couple we've seen, they are great with the Explorer mechanic. And this one, no exception. So if you play this with Explore. Also, faster land drops could get you to Ascend faster. Sometimes they'll be relevant. Because especially if you're not drafting and you're playing Sealed or you had a bad draft, there's a lot of other options other than Tribal. I've been talking a lot about Tribal, but think about Black and Green has some Explore interactions with some light reanimation, which is interesting. You have Azorius Flyers, which I mentioned earlier. So there's different things you can do out there. You can kind of think outside the box a little bit. You lose some of the tribal synergies, which can be quite powerful, but every once in a while you can still hobble together something really good, so keep that in mind. So anyway, with that being said, this card feels like I at least want to try it out, and as long as I have maybe some card draw and some Explorer behind it, I think it's good. If I don't have that behind it, I don't know if I always play this. If I'm just a more straightforward, aggressive deck or just trying to power out some big dinosaurs, maybe I don't really care about this that much, honestly. But there are certain builds where I think this could be good. I do think it's a little too high variance for standard, unfortunately, but it's an interesting card. I kind of want to test this out a little bit and try it. World Shaper. Really cool Merfolk again for standard because it's a 3/3 for 4. So again, it kind of feels like on par for just a fine 4-drop creature, but it's also a Merfolk. And it helps you populate your graveyard a little bit, which could matter. We're going to see a card tomorrow where that's very relevant if you're in Golgari colors. So that's something to think about. Also, when this dies, you get to put all lands from your graveyard out to the battlefield. So it does work as a Ascend enabler as well as a ramp spell, potentially. Now, how many lands will be in your graveyard? Well, that just depends. It's a little high variance. But if you hit 1 or 2, hey, you know what? That's probably good enough. So they do come into play tapped. But again, it doesn't matter because next turn you'll have them available. And again, maybe it's just more about Ascend than anything else at that point. So I would think of this more as an Ascend enabler than a ramp spell. Honestly, I would look at it that way. And yeah, sweet card just overall. Could this make it into the world of standard? I feel like it might be a little too expensive and maybe situational again there, unfortunately. It's a good card, and I would almost want to put it in the Merfolk deck, but I think there's going to be a lot of competition. That deck is going to be super tight, I think, actually. So I think maybe this just misses out. This is another card that maybe in the future, though, I think we might see more graveyard mechanics coming from Dominaria. They sprinkled some foreshadowing in the set when it comes to what their mechanics may be doing in the future. So this card, I don't know, maybe has implications down the road. So it's definitely another one to keep an eye on for sure. All right, guess what? Those are the green cards. We only got one chapter left. We're going to come back tomorrow, look at the rest of the cards, basically multicolor and colorless cards. So that includes your artifacts, your lands, and all your multicolor goodness. A couple planeswalkers in there. So the day after, we're going to do a pre-release video in case maybe you've never gone to a pre-release before, kind of what to know, what to expect. And then we have a couple Market Watch videos coming up this week as well, one of which focusing on Arrivals of Ixalan. So get you ready to know what you're going to be opening up at your pre-release and what it's valued at. So anyway, with that being said, we'll see you tomorrow. Until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe. Have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.